This is Pushing Boundaries, a podcast about pioneering research, breakthrough discoveries, and unconventional ideas. I'm your host, Dr. Thomas R. Verney. My guest today is Father Laurence Freeman OSB, a Benedictine monk of the congregation of Monte Olivetto Maggiore in Italy. Of Irish and English parentage, Father Laurence was educated by the Benedictines and studied English literature at Oxford University. Before entering monastic life, he worked with the United Nations in New York in banking and journalism. He is the director of the World Community for Christian Meditation, an inclusive contemplative community based in Bonnevaux. My French is not very good. Please correct me if it's really off kilter.
It's very adequate.
It's adequate. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be adequate. The World Community for Christian Meditation is a center for peace where meditation is practiced and taught as a way to personal and social transformation. Father Laurence is a prolific author. His books include Light Within, The Selfless Self, Your Daily Practice, Jesus, the Teacher Within, First Sight, The Experience of Faith, Web of Silence, and Good Work, Meditation for Personal and Organizational Transformation. I need one more sentence here. He has collaborated with the Dalai Lama on many dialogues and on the groundbreaking book, The Good Heart. In addition to his work for the contemplative renewal of Christianity, he leads dialogues and peace initiatives, seeing meditation as opening the common ground of all humanity. He was awarded the Order of Canada in recognition of his work for interfaith dialogue and the promotion of world peace. His daily wisdom, which we sorely need, quarterly spiritual letter, other regular teachings online, and his retreats and conferences are sources of inspiration for many worldwide. Welcome, Father Laurence.
Thank you, Thomas.
I'm so happy, really, you were able to join us. Am I correct in assuming that meditation is central to your teaching?
Yes, it's central and foundational.
Could you explain what you understand by that term and how you teach and practice it, please?
I would call it central because
yes.
And foundational because it is a daily practice for me, and we teach it as a daily practice. We'd recommend that people meditate twice a day, morning and evening, which has a transformative effect upon our sense of time and our way of living. Here in my center here, my life here in the community at Bonnevaux, in fact, we meditate 4 times a day. And many people, of course, as I did when I first began, feel that I don't have time to meditate. But the discovery that's really quite life-changing is that when you meditate, you have more time. The time that you give to the meditation comes back. I wouldn't say 100-fold, but it comes back, and you've got, of course, you approach the business of living and one's own inner life in a more peaceful way. Of course, it takes time to develop that practice, and one has to be patient. I suppose one of the central principles or discoveries of my life is that meditation creates community. And that's a mysterious fact. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. And why it creates community, I think, is a very important question for our time and our future. And meditation creates community among those who meditate, but it also is a support to meditation. So in a sense, you could say that we always meditate in a community, and the community supports us and may introduce us to the meditation practice, and then supports us on over the whole journey of meditation. So that's my basic my basic life and work. And over many years now, my work has been to share this gift of meditation widely in different ways, but especially by meditating together with people, but also through writing and through talking. But it's really a very simple practice, and it is transmitted, I think, in a very simple way when we meditate together. Anyway, I won't go on. I'm sure you have other questions, but that's what I mean by central and foundational.
I understand. So in terms of community, I've always thought sort of meditation as being like singularly alone kind of a thing, you know, that you go and sit in a cave or something.
Yes, yeah.
and meditate by yourself, right? But you are speaking of a community. So don't the other people kind of distract you? Their breathing, their coughing, their movements. How do you
that can happen?
Yeah,
that can happen, of course, and that's why we also recommend and develop a certain discipline or protocol. You know, when you meditate together, there's a sort of beginning and the end of the meditation with a bell or a gong, and during that time, everybody tries to sit as still and as quietly as possible. So, and there are some people who will say they prefer to meditate on their own, and others who say that they prefer to meditate with others because it's supportive. I think both are true in this sense, that, and I think maybe we have to understand the idea of solitude. Solitude is not only about being separated from other people physically. It's solitude in a cave or wherever, in a hermitage. Some people are more solitary than others in that sense, and they like to be on their own more, but solitude itself, certainly in the monastic wisdom, is not just about being withdrawn from company. It's about the discovery and the acceptance of your uniqueness. And the interesting discovery is that when we enter that solitude, for example, in the time of meditation, and we embrace our own uniqueness, for example, by leaving images and conversations with ourselves behind, or our fantasy world, or our problem-solving mind, as we leave that aside, which is how I understand meditation, then we find ourselves more and more deeply in this solitude. And the curious and wonderful discovery is that this solitude, accepting your uniqueness, is also the means to much deeper and richer sense of relationship to others. And in that sense, very importantly for our time, which is a time for many people, a time of loneliness and isolation, solitude is the cure for loneliness. And we could say that loneliness, and of course you can be lonely in a crowd, loneliness is a failed solitude. It's the failure or the inability to really be oneself and accept oneself in one's uniqueness. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And it's a lot to digest because it's very wise and really quite deep. That would be a nice sentence to meditate upon, actually, you know. solitude is the cure for loneliness. I think that's very interesting. I shall certainly think about that more later on. But speaking of what to meditate on, you recommend a mantra, I believe, which is Maranatha. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
And you like the idea of it having 4 syllables. Can you tell me why?
Well, the purpose of the mantra, which is a meditation word, or in the religious wisdom traditions, it's usually a sacred word or a sacred phrase, maybe from scripture. The mantra, and we find this this method of meditation universally expressed in different ways, but essentially the same practice in all the major religious spiritual traditions. So the purpose of the mantra is not to give you something to think about. Quite the reverse. It is the purpose of it is to lay aside your thoughts. Now, when I was first introduced to meditation, I was in my first year at university, and I went to visit my teacher, John Main, and I remember very vividly, it was a turning point in my life, in one of our conversations about my problems and issues. He introduced me to meditation in a very simple way, in a very few words. And this is what he said: when you meditate, you sit down, you sit still, you breathe normally, you close your eyes, and then you begin to repeat a word, a mantra, continuously, faithfully during the time of the meditation. And when you get distracted from this work or this practice of saying the mantra, listening to the mantra, when you get distracted and you find yourself daydreaming or falling asleep or fantasizing or chewing over your problems and anxieties, as soon as you realize that's happened, you drop the thought and you return to the mantra. So we could say then that meditation is not what you think, in both senses of the phrase. And the mantra allows us to lay aside our thoughts. This expression that meditation is the laying aside of thoughts is actually a famous saying of an ancient Christian monk from the 2nd century. So that's, now choosing the mantra is important, because you want to ideally to stay with the same word or the same phrase continuously during the meditation, and also from day to day. And the effect of this is that the mantra, over time, gently but very effectively, with regular practice, takes you, as it were, from the head to the heart. Or you could also say integrates or harmonizes those centers of consciousness, our head and our heart. And by heart, I don't mean just our emotional center. The heart in the mystical tradition is the spiritual point. I think the mathematical definition of a point is that it has position but no magnitude. So it's a center, a point of integration. And it's in the heart then that we find our essential wholeness. It's in the heart that we discover the solitude we were talking about, but as solitude as a basis of relationship. So, and of course, in many traditions, the heart is a point of infinite space, and consciousness expands, and beyond our normal egoistic levels of self-concern and desire and fear and so on. So the mantra has this gift of very gently and naturally taking us into this point of wholeness, the center, and taking us on a journey that, of course, is the journey of life and a journey without boundaries. And the mantra that we recommend,
yes,
really is the word Maranatha.
right.
Maranatha is not the only word you could choose, but it's ideal in many ways. First of all, in the Christian tradition, it means "Come, Lord." It's the oldest Christian prayer. In Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. We find it in the early scriptures. And it was a sort of a password or sacred word for in the early tradition. But it also is fairly universal, because the syllables that you find in Ma, Ra, Na, Tha are what the Indian tradition calls seed syllables. And they're the syllables that have a calming effect on the mind. And the 4 syllables also means that you can say the mantra in rhythm with your breath, for example. Now, as you meditate, the breath becomes slower, and you find that you're saying the mantra more gently and subtly and listening to it. And eventually, it may lead you into silence, complete silence. But by silence, I don't mean just feeling quiet and calm, which is a good thing, but by silence, I would mean a place without thought or self-reflection, but at the same time of being awake. So the mantra takes us from this first level of the monkey mind, where we're jumping all around all the time. It takes us to a deeper level of consciousness, which you could call the hard disk of our psyche, where everything is recorded, where we have, for example, memories and unfinished feelings, and problems that we have sort of pushed away. So the mantra takes us through that, meditation takes us through that level as a healing process. Now, I'm not saying you may not also need other forms of healing, but this is meditation in this sense, we could say is a very therapeutic practice. Then it leads you to a third level. This is a very rough map, but it takes you to a third level, which you could call the brick wall of the ego. And this is our feeling of separateness. I mean, you tell me what you feel about this, but the ego develops early in life, and it's necessary to have a healthy ego in order to separate and make relationships of our own, so we don't collapse into other people, and we learn to move on and so on. But at the same time, the ego can be a place of great woundedness and defensiveness. We can become locked into our ego, and we don't know how to get out of it. So there's another level then in this work of meditation that works on this feeling of separateness. One of the early books on Christian meditation calls it the naked awareness of the self. Just the naked awareness of the self. And then we have to just continue meditating in that place when we reach that level. But now we're probably meditating more gently, or more subtly, and more deeply. And then in moments and progressively, the bricks in the wall of the ego fall out. And it's then that we see that there is something beyond the ego. We could call it the spirit or the self. And this is where we really enter into transcendence, but it's in a kind of embodied transcendence. It's not being spaced out. It's being at the same time grounded in our own reality and in reality itself. So Anyway, that's quite a long answer to your question, but those are sort of the stages that the mantra can take us through.
Thank you for that. So, you know, as a person who tries to understand things from a scientific standpoint, I totally resonate with what you said about the heart. I don't know whether you're familiar with my new book, The Embodied Mind. Have you?
I haven't read it, but I have heard about it, and I love the concept. I think it's yes. Please go on.
So I think we are on the same wavelengths as far as that is concerned. What I would like to understand, and I think that many people who are listening to this might want to understand, is how not thinking, laying aside our thoughts, as you said, emptying your mind, so to speak, can help you to go deeper. How does that happen? Why does it happen?
Well, how does it happen? I don't know.
Okay.
I think the how is how do we explain it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one way of explaining it, I could certainly say it happens. I think for one thing, we have to say that the level at which this journey is unfolding through the practice of meditation, is a level of essentially of a non-dualistic mind or consciousness. This is very hard for us to speak about, of course, because the non-dualistic mind takes us beyond language and image into a direct experience of reality, of our own being, of truth. And it's not only in the meditation, of course, but one of the fruits of the practice of meditation is that we find that we're living, as you would say, with an embodied mind, but we're living in daily life with a more direct feeling of contact and participation in the flow of reality, rather than working with models of reality or our projections of reality. So by laying aside our thoughts and imagination, thoughts, words, and images in the time of meditation, we are in effect withdrawing our projections and our version of reality, the version of reality that we construct automatically, involuntarily in our minds and feelings and imagination. And as we do this work of silence, for example, in the Katha Upanishad, there's this beautiful passage where it says, "Happy is the person who has found their work. Happy is the person who has found the work of silence. And happier yet is the person who knows that silence is work." And I think that's helpful because it reminds us that meditation is much more than just relaxation. Many people identify meditation and mindfulness as if they were the same thing. Well, any Buddhist, I think, my Buddhist friends would say that mindfulness techniques are essentially part of a bigger pattern than is usually understood today. And the purpose of these mindfulness methods or techniques is to prepare us for meditation. And in meditation, we are taking the attention off ourselves. And that's the most difficult thing in the world for us to do, to take the attention off ourselves, because we keep reverting. It's like a spring keeps taking us back into self self-consciousness and self-analysis. So, but we learn by developing the muscle of attention in meditation, what are the real fantastic fruits of being free from this self-fixation which keeps us focused on ourselves. So how it works, I think, is that it shows us and trains us little by little, daily practice, to be open to this journey that we make as we take the attention off ourselves, and that journey opens us up to a much deeper, fuller, and richer experience of reality, or not even an experience of reality, but the feeling of participation in reality. And that, as I said, has at its root this non-dualistic, non-objectifying level of or heart of consciousness, simple consciousness, like a child.
I have watched your interview on Buddha at the gas pump.
Oh, yes.
Which is a great title. And I was struck by you saying, we don't glorify suffering, nor do we deny its meaning. That's wisdom. Have I got that right?
It sounds right. Yes.
I think I wrote it down, so I think it's pretty accurate.
Yes.
Okay, so I wonder what you mean by wisdom. Like, why is neither glorifying suffering nor denying its meaning wisdom?
Well, I was thinking about this recently. Actually, I was reading some sayings of the Buddha late in his life.
Yeah.
When he described his body as being, I think he described his body as being held together by bits of string, and he was falling apart. And it was rather like Prince Philip,
yes.
the Queen's husband, when he retired from public life, and he was in his 90s, and he said, somebody said to him, "Ah, sir, so you're stepping down from your duties?" He said, "Yes, because I couldn't stand up any longer."
Right. Very good.
So anyway,
yes.
the Buddha was in this state, and he was in great pain at the end. But so I think we could say then he was in pain, he was suffering, but he wasn't absorbed in the suffering. He wasn't overwhelmed by it. He accepted it in the same way that Christ accepted the suffering of his passion and death. So suffering exists, certainly, and it's a fantasy to think, I think, that we would ever be totally free from suffering. However, it's possible to accept suffering and also to see that it is part of the journey of life, and actually even brings certain graces or benefits which teach us. I mean, I'm sure we've all had the experience of going through a time of great suffering, and we may think, I'm not going to make it. Couldn't get worse than this. And then you do, with the help of your friends, with love and with meditation, you come through it, and then later you look back on it and say, you might say, well, thank God that's over, but you might also say, I'm grateful for it. It taught me. And I think I could say that times in my own life. I think, and I've met many people who have really surprised me as they describe experiences of unbelievable suffering, but they look back at a certain point and they say, I'm so grateful that I had this because of what I've learned. A woman once who had a very, very painful last few months of her life, before the pain was able to be controlled, but she was in pain. And she said to me, it has been a terrible year, but I'm grateful for it because it has taught me so much. So suffering is a fact of life, and we should avoid all the suffering we can avoid. But what we can't avoid, we should learn humbly to accept and allow it to teach us or to work its way through us. And what I think it leads us into is wisdom. Wisdom is an understanding born of the reconciliation of opposites, and it reveals that the way into deeper reality is always through paradox, where you think this is an impossible situation. I can't possibly reconcile these two things. You could say, I'm young, I've got a young family, and I've got a terminal illness, and this is impossible. But you can also then learn that there is in a most paradoxical way, a joy in that, or not because you're dying, but because of what it's teaching you about the love you have for your family and so on. So life is full of unique manifestations of this essential truth. I think that suffering, when it's accepted, teaches us to see things in their wholeness and to integrate contradictions.
Well, I think a lot of people, including myself, struggle with this concept of suffering. And I'm really not trying to argue with you on this. I'm just trying to understand it, please. Mm-hmm. So, like, what you say is fine for people who survive the suffering. But what about all those people who die in suffering? How will they benefit from that suffering in any way?
Well, I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Well, a difficult answer then.
Well, okay. I think that I've been with people who have been dying and who did not want to leave this life and leave their family and loved ones. But when they realized that this was happening, mm-hmm. they did not deny it, or they let go of the anger and the resistance. And as they did that, and because they were surrounded, with people who were loving them, they found a peace, and that peace, I don't say on every deathbed, but that peace is like an energy that communicates itself to others. And I found this, for example, when my teacher John Main was dying, and at a young age, when I was with him in his sick room, I felt very peaceful because he just generated this peaceful energy. When I left the room, I felt a lot of sadness, a lot of turbulence. So it's a definite kind of energy. Peace is an energy. It's not something negative. It's not just as a relaxation. It's an energy of reconciled harmony and being. The other thing I would say is that when we see someone suffering, we may not be seeing everything that is happening within them. And they may on the surface appear very turbulent, very unhappy, very, very much in a struggle. But at a deeper level to which they have gone, they are, as it were, on the ocean bed, and they are in a place of stability and peace. I once spoke with a man who had had a near-death experience when he was drowning. And he said, you know, it was a typical description of the near-death experience. He saw the light attracting him and welcoming him, and he said, I was just so happy, so relieved. You know, I was going home. And he said, my life passed before my eyes. But he said, it wasn't like a judgment. He said, the light was not judging me, and I was not judging myself. I just could see what my life had been like and the mistakes I'd made and so on, but without guilt or resentment. And then he said, I was just so happy to be going into this light. And then, of course, he didn't go into the light. He came back and he realized that he had more work to do. And but when as he spoke this, as he told me about this, I thought, what did he look like under the water when he was drowning? He must have been flailing around desperately trying to get air and whatever. And so even suffering exists, I think, it can be very intense and overwhelming at certain levels, but there are levels beyond suffering as well.
So when you look at the history of the world, let's say just the last 100 years, okay, and you look at the Armenian genocide, you look at the Holocaust, you look at what's happening in Ukraine every day, the millions of refugees in South America, Syria, North Africa. I have. How do you keep your faith in a good and benevolent God when he or she allows these kinds of things to happen every day?
Well, I don't think there's a pragmatic answer to that. I mean, it would be ridiculous to say, yes, but good comes out of this, you know. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Right.
But I was in Auschwitz, the first time I went to Auschwitz, and I was numbed. And I was walking around with my friend, and I suddenly heard, I was saying in my head, I don't believe this, I don't believe it. And then we went into a little room which was under the nightmare operating theater of Dr. Mengele. And it was a little cell. And there was where they would keep prisoners before they killed them. Or
experiment on them.
What?
Or experiment on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went into this room, and it had this absolute stillness and silence there. And it was a place, well, I don't think there's almost there are no words really to describe it. And in fact, I felt that at the whole of Auschwitz. It's a place of silence. And anything you say is in a way going to betray the truth. But anyway, in this little cell, I noticed then in a corner of one of the walls, I think there was a Polish Catholic soldier had been put in there, I think, and he had drawn on the wall a little picture of Christ on the cross. And that was no doubt a comfort to him and an expression of his faith. But it's not an answer to the question of evil, but it does confront the nature of evil. And for me, it was, my simple answer to that question is God does not allow evil to happen, but God is in the suffering of those who are subjected to that evil. Now, Etty Hillesum was a young Jewish woman, in Amsterdam, who died in Dachau, I think, and she was rounded up with the Jews and sent off on the transportation. But before that happened, she was free, and she was running between the different holding camps in Amsterdam. And during that awful time, she was not a religious person, and she was quite a strong and sensual young woman. But during that time, she was keeping an amazing diary, which was one of the great spiritual documents of our time, I think. And she found in this horror, she said, I think she described it as like a well or a huge space opening up inside of her. And she couldn't understand what this was and how to name it. And eventually she said, well, maybe I just better call it God. And she, in this space, and she lived and she helped the people running with messages and helped from one camp to another. And she would be overwhelmed as she walked through the street, and she would see a flower growing on the side of the road. And she would be filled with this bliss and joy, the beauty of the world. So again, and she describes one conversation she had with some of her fellow Jews who were being held and their lives sort of about to end, really. And they were expressing such anger and hatred against the German soldiers who were holding them. And but filled with, understandably, filled with anger and hatred. And Etty said to them, I don't know exactly what she said now, but she's something like, don't waste your energy on this. Don't hate them, because that's only going to make it worse for you. And they said, what are you saying? We've got to love them? And she said, well, okay, maybe, something like that. So she didn't have easy answers, but I think in her description of her experience of finding God in a non-denominational and non-theological way almost, she was living this reality that God is omnipresent. God is the ground of being, and God is present in everything. And there is this very challenging and almost terrible saying of Jesus. He says, God is like the sun that shines on good and bad alike, and is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. So it's no easy answer, definitely.
So in your life up to now, have you ever had a moment when you doubted when you doubted that God exists?
I think when I was growing up as a child, I was quite religious, brought up in a Irish Catholic family, and I was, looking back, I'm grateful for that because it gave me a language and a foundation. When I entered into adolescence, I drifted away from it. I found it didn't really answer my question. So I would say I forgot God then.
Mm.
And the symbols, the rituals, the language of my religious upbringing disappeared. And so I just wasn't thinking about God, or I was looking for meaning and truth and dealing with the hardships of life. And I was perplexed and made mistakes. But I think I didn't think about God. And I think, to be honest, it was with meditation and suffering and meditation. I began gradually to sort of re-engage or reconnect, not so much with the idea of God, but with the presence of God, which is a nameless presence. And but I began to be aware of that nameless presence more strongly. And I would say it's not something you doubt, because it's just something that grows stronger. There's certainly times where I felt very alone, or in very times of great loss or pain, and I don't think of God as some button you can press that will make all that go away instantly. And I also don't think of prayer as primarily as getting you out of those difficult situations. I think meditation is pure prayer, not in the sense that you are asking for anything or asking God to change his mind, but pure prayer in the sense that you learn to be in meditation. And then you realize that God is being, and God is your being. And so in the silence, in the stillness of meditation, you are being with God. God is being with you, but not in a way that you can psychologize so much or imagine so much. I mean, of course, the great mystics write very beautifully about this experience, using metaphors and sometimes erotic imagery to describe it, but it's not something that can easily be put into words, of course. But then I think this pure prayer also helps you to understand there are other practices and other helps in life that can nourish and assist you dealing with the search for truth and dealing with difficult times. But I like the expression of Meister Eckhart, who was a 12th century mystic, a Christian mystic, very, very attractive to Buddhists today as well. And Meister Eckhart has a sentence that says, "I pray to God to rid me of God." And what he's saying, I think, is God is not what you think. So there was another great
paradox
mystic teacher, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, who said, "Every image of God is an idol." So I don't struggle with doubt, of course, but sometimes the divine life and energy is a reality, but it's not anything that you can really take a selfie with, you know.
Well, thank you. Perhaps that would be a good place to stop. I think you have given me, us, a lot to think about, and it has been very enlightening and just very rewarding being able to converse with you. I thank you so much for being our guest. And before we close, I want to tell our listeners that you have a website, WCCM.com.
.org.
.org?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Does it say .com then? No,
Yeah.
.org.
.org. Okay, thank you for correcting that. And it's the website where people can watch over 300 hours of talks, retreats, led meditations, and major events with new titles added every month. Have I got that right?
Absolutely right. You're a very good marketeer. Thank you.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, I'm much more interested in ideas than marketing.
Oh, I can see that. I wish it had been more of a conversation. I felt I'd spoken too much. Anyway, I'm going to meditate in half an hour, so I'll make up for all this talking. But well, I'm very grateful for your invitation.
Anytime you wish to have a conversation, I'm available. And I just want to say, for the future, my guest next week will be Dr. Jessica Eccles. We shall talk about philosophy of mind and brain-body interactions and the relationship between joint hypermobility, autonomic dysfunction, and psychiatric symptoms. A very, very interesting doctor from the UK, and I'm sure that you will enjoy her talk. So in the meantime, Brother Laurence, thank you so much again, and until we meet again, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Thomas. Bye now. Bye-bye.